Hello humans, it's just Martine, and it's time for another episode of TBR Crime. TBR Crime is my bi-monthly TBR game. I play it, I read books, we review those books. It's a lot of fun. I'm going around a randomized game board as the detective Blake Pradera. We collect prompts along the way and try to close a case in 2 months' time. That's our time limit. This is the September-October round, and a lot's gonna happen. So without further ado, let's just jump into setting up the game board. We are here for the 6th round of TBR Crime, and I have switched out my die today to my other D6 because in episode 5, if you haven't watched it, check it out, my die was absolutely evil, kept rolling ones, and so I switched it out to give that one a break to recover from its obvious curse and just reset our situation. We're going to start the game by picking our partner for the case. Okay. Eep, I'm scared. Okay, we're going with Frank Gopnik. His advantage is roleplay. Every clue is worth double the cool points. So those are these green cards. But his disadvantage is that he really can't read a room, so his action prompts, those are the blue cards, are only worth 1 cool point. Oh, that's kind of devastating. But it does not impact our board, so we're just going to randomly assign colors to each spot. Okay, so this is our board for round 6. Frank and Blake are going to hit the ground running and move 4 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a bonus. They're going to create the perfect backstory, and to do that, they need to read a book with a character name in the title. For a whopping 6 points with a character name in the title, I ended up reading Donna Has Left the Building because our main character's name is Donna. And I'm giving this 3.5 stars. I was really intrigued about this book because when I got it from the Dollar Tree, the cashier was like, "Oh, I'm reading that one. It's really good so far." So obviously I was like, can't wait to read it. I'm giving it 3.5 stars. I feel like the first 2/3 felt like more of a 3-star to me. The last third felt more like a 4-star, except for the ending, which was incredibly sudden and inconclusive in a way that didn't feel right. You know, sometimes you have an inconclusive end to the book and you're like, I think this is right. It makes a statement. This I'm not sure did based on exactly where they left the characters, but that's fine, I guess. In this one, we're following Donna. She is 45 and she is a salesperson for this like kitchen utensil company. I don't know. It's like one of those things where like you buy your stock, you sell it to people, you do demos, etc. So she does that. Our story starts when she goes on a trip to Vegas for a like conference for all the people that work for this company, expecting to maybe get an award for how long she's been with the company and how good her sales record is. But things kind of don't go as she expected, and they fall apart from there, including when she goes home and she discovers something about her husband that she was not expecting. Then she goes on to have a crisis for the rest of the book that I don't think is ever resolved in any real way. One thing that I liked about this book was that it really just went after the idea of having a complete breakdown. Our main character made so many absolutely terrible decisions in this. Like, we committed to that being what the story was about and just seeing how she handled those situations. So I could appreciate that. But also our main character just drove me a little crazy. And sometimes I can like that in a character, but in this case, like, I didn't particularly. I don't know, she was really going through some things and she was not handling it at all well. And I just wanted to shake her sometimes and be like, what are you doing? One of the other things I liked about it was that in a typical road trip book, I feel like we're gaining some things along the way. And I feel like the whole time she was really just losing. I thought it was fine. I thought it was good. I liked the part at the end, like the last third, when she turned to some other people's problems instead of her own, not only because it put her problems in context, but then because we got to have this good conversation about, like, even though I see other people are suffering worse than me, like, I'm still suffering and my suffering is still legitimate. Because people try to compare suffering all the time to see, like, who has it worse. And the truth is, pain is just pain. Like, pain hurts, the end. And it doesn't matter if somebody has it worse than you, your situation can still feel terrible. And so I appreciated that commentary. But yeah, I'm not sure that it felt like it was going anywhere. Yep, just like that sentence. I don't think it was going anywhere. That's the end of the thought. 3.5 stars. It is. She was an interesting character to follow. Like, did not know what she was going to do next. But I'm done with that now. So, 6 points. Hooray, let's go see what we get next. Roll 2. That's a 3. Okay, so this is going to be worth double the points because of Frank. We have a clue. There is DNA found at the scene, so we need to read a book with the letters ACGT in the title and author name. The last time I got this prompt, it was actually really hard to find one that fits, so wish me luck. So this is kind of a tricky prompt, but the good news is, since it's a clue and Frank is our partner, we get double the points. So I'll get 6 points instead of 3 for reading The Collective by Allison Galen, which I'm giving 3.5 stars. For the prompt of ACGT in the title and author, I'm taking the A from Allison, the C from Collective, the G from Galen, and the T from The. Hooray. This one has a pretty unique setup. We're following a mom, and unfortunately, her teenage daughter has passed away, and the person who she believes is responsible for her daughter's death has gone off scot-free, has been totally acquitted of any criminal intent or activity, and so she feels a lot of festering anger about this, and a lot of people try to get her to move on with her grief and let it go, but she's just harboring a lot of resentment about how it all plays out, especially as the life of the young man who hurt her daughter continues to go, like, better and better over time, until one day the main character is invited to join this group for grieving mothers that actually leads her to this site on the dark web where mothers of children whose murderers were not brought to justice all talk about the different ways in which they want to murder the murderers. They want to get back at them in the ultimate way. And there seems to be a group on this site called The Collective that works together to make that happen. So our main character gets involved in the collective and starts doing these tasks to contribute to the deaths of these people who allegedly contributed to the deaths of these children, of these moms. I think you get the point. I think you get the idea. But obviously, as our story continues, it raises a lot of questions and feelings in our main character about whether or not this is the route that she wants to be taking. The author did go for a crazy ending. Hats off to her. It was a bold choice, and I really appreciated it. But although this book was interesting, it wasn't, like, it just didn't give 4-star or above feelings. The writing was fine. I didn't connect particularly with the characters. I thought it posed some fascinating moral questions and dilemmas. And again, I think the decision made some bold choices, but yeah, it was just kind of a fun time and nothing more than that. So 3.5 stars it is, and 6 points for me and Blake. Roll 3. A 1. Would obviously be best if we didn't get that, but it happens. So we have some drudgery, oh no, oh god, oh no, the copier is broken. So we are going to have to do every prompt after this 2 times. We do not get twice the points. We just have to do the prompt twice. We're a little early on the board for me to be at all okay with that. So I need my D6 to really cooperate here. Okay, roll 4. That's a 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, regardless, we only get 1 point. We have to read 2 books for this. We're going to question a suspect. So we're reading a book with a 1-word title. Twice. We're reading 2 books, each with a one-word title. The irony is not lost on me that the first prompt that I have to do 2 times is to read a book with a one-word title. But here we are. So the first book that I read for this was Atlas by Becca C. Smith, which I'm giving 3 stars. I had a pretty fun time while reading it, but this will not be a book that I remember. In this one, we're following this special agent. She's part of this elite task force, and they're called in one day to like drop into the president's airplane. Yes, while it's in motion, because there is a threat. But then they enter the airplane and it turns out the threat is the president. And so she neutralizes the threat. And that's when it becomes clear that not all is as it seems, because the president had been the current incarnation of the god Atlas. And when she neutralizes that threat, the responsibility transfers to her. And she is the new humanized Atlas or whatever. And so she's supposed to complete a task every 4 days or the world will end. No pressure, right? She immediately refuses to do her first task. Now, I can understand why she made that decision. The first task was crazy, but also I feel like it relied on some character dynamics that were just not there. She doesn't want to do anything to hurt her current boyfriend. If I was in her position, I would not want to hurt people either. Period. Doesn't matter how close to me they are. But she really sold it as if the main problem was because it was her boyfriend. But at the very beginning of the book, my read on their relationship was that they were not using labels and that they were very casual. So it was really confusing when she was given this responsibility and then she turned around and her reasoning for not following through was that like this was her person. And I was like, is he though? Is he your person? Like I did not get that vibe from the jump. Nor did I get the vibe through the rest of the book, except you saying how much you loved him. Like, it just didn't click for me. I thought there were some interesting themes because we're facing the idea of, like, cosmic responsibility being dropped in your lap. Not only that, but being suddenly handed to you when it was supposed to go to somebody else. There's another person who's been training to take over as Atlas, like, his whole life. But she takes it instead on accident because she doesn't know what she's doing. And so she is not at all prepared for the power that she's given, and somebody else was prepared. So I thought that was an interesting dynamic. And it, of course, created some more tension because the two of them could not exist simultaneously. So that was a little drama. But yeah, at the end of the day, I just felt some disconnect in the characters' reasonings. The stakes did not feel nearly as high as they should have. Like, they were, but I just was so disconnected from the characters that the stakes didn't feel high. Like, the stakes were high. The world was going to end. But I was like, whatever, you know? And so it's just getting a 3-star. Like, fun. I was there while I was reading it. I am not there now. We are moving on. And we would be picking a new prompt normally, but I guess we're just picking another book with a one-word title at this point. So let's do that. For my second book with a one-word title, I read Timeline by Michael Crichton, which I'm giving 3.5 stars. Okay, this is a time travel, universe travel book. This tech company has created this technology that helps you travel into different universes, which is their explanation of time travel. They get into a lot about relativity. They've got lots of sciencey things going into their explanation, but the basic idea is that they can send people back in time, whatever. We're following this group of people who's on an archaeological dig at this old castle in France from like the medieval times. And one day they find a note from a professor that used to be on the dig, but it's an old note from medieval times that says that he needs help. And so this company sends this team of historians and archaeologists back in time to try and rescue this professor because something has happened to him in medieval France and he needs help. Overall, I had fun with this one. I do like time travel, universe travel stories in general, and this was no exception. However, there were a couple things that made it just not my favorite in that, is it a subgenre? Is it a trope? I don't know. That area of books. First of all, they only ever traveled to one place, which I respect that decision. They made that decision. But we spent so much time and energy setting up the explanation for the technology that to really only send them to one place, a little baffling. I guess there was one character in the beginning who, like, went kind of somewhere else, but really we spend the book going one place. And I just feel like if you have that much to work with, you could go anywhere and do anything. And I think other authors have made the most out of that. If you're going to do a time travel book where you're going to one place, I need you to spend less time setting up the explanation for how the time travel is occurring, because in Outlander, we don't spend that much time on it, at least initially. I feel like here we really set it up just for them to travel to one place, which felt like a bit of a waste of time and energy in terms of setting up the book. There were also some character decisions made that just didn't fully make sense to me, and I don't feel like ever fully resolved. I'm specifically thinking of a character from back in medieval France that featured kind of prominently in the story, and just her decisions made no sense, and I don't think we got real answers about them, because she was a bit all over the place, but we never found a definite, like, this is where her mind is at type of situation. Like, we never got real clarity on her. There was also, by the end, a relationship between two characters that I straight up did not believe at all. So there's that. Some of the action sequences were fun, like there was a joust involved and I enjoyed that. Some of them were just meh or hard to keep track of. I do really appreciate that Michael Crichton took the time to be like, here are historians. They should know what they're walking into. They are still unprepared. So there was this great discussion about studying things in an academic context versus the realities of those things. And that's an idea that I spend a lot of time thinking about as a largely applied psychologist, because in the field of legal psychology, we do most of our work because we want it to apply to the legal system, to actual real people. And yet it's so different sitting there talking theoretically about people's experiences versus actually experiencing those things ourselves. And so I thought that was a very smart way to have the discussion of the difference between knowledge about things and experiences with things. So I appreciated that. It was fairly fun, but like there were things that could have been done better. So 3.5 stars it is. We've officially questioned this suspect. Let's see our next prompt that I guess we're gonna have to do twice. I guess this is just what we do now. Roll 5. That's a 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Some more drudgery. Please, nothing like the broken copier that we just had. Okay, we're going to write some case notes, and for +2 cool points, we're going to read 2 award-winning books. For my first award-winning book, I read Twilight by Stephenie Meyer, because say what you want about this book, but it's won some awards. Maybe not a Pulitzer Prize, but like lots of popularity awards. It's won Teen Choice Book Awards. Like, it's won some stuff. So I'm counting that as award winning. I also had to read it this month for the Throwback Book Club. It is my first time ever reading Twilight, and I am shocked but happy to say that I'm giving Twilight 4 stars. I just had so much fun reading this. I read it in a span of 2 days, and I just had so much fun doing so. I felt like it was a lot more lighthearted than I expected it was going to be, like a lot funnier and ridiculous, but in a way that it didn't shy away from, which I really enjoyed. And like Edward as a character was a lot more boyish than I had anticipated, mainly because most of what I knew about Twilight was from seeing like the previews for the movies and posters and posts online and stuff. And in the movies, the characters do not look lighthearted and like they're having a good fun time. They look broody and angsty. And so finding out that the characters are actually like kind of funny in this book and a bit more lighthearted was just really enjoyable for me. If you happen not to know, Twilight is one of the ultimate 2000s teen like YA book series, and in our first book we're following Bella as she moves from Arizona back to Forks, Washington to live with her dad and go to a new school, and there she meets the Cullens, especially Edward Cullen, who is just this really strange guy who seems to hate her at first. She's just really intrigued and drawn to him, mainly because he's beautiful. Like, that's all there is to it. And so the first book is the story of the two of them getting to know one another. And it's just such a silly, fun time. I'm really interested to see where the rest of this series goes, because I felt like it could have been a standalone. Like, I read it and I was like, this could have been the end of the story. Since I enjoyed it, I'm glad to be reading more of it. But like, it could have stopped there. There are obviously good and bad things about Twilight, and I'm not going to get into that debate right now. The point is that I had fun, and that's what I was looking for, so that award has been won in my book. Of course, now I do have to find another award-winning book to read, so that's great. But out of these 2 points, I guess technically Twilight earned me one of them, so thanks, Twilight, for that. For my second award-winning book, we're going with a big award, because I read Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides, which won a Pulitzer Prize in 2003. I'm giving this book 4 stars. I obviously thought it was very good. I obviously still had some problems with it, though. That's what a 4-star means. In this book, it's theoretically about our main character, Cal, who is intersex. Cal is raised as female from birth. During adolescence, learns that gender and sex is a bit more complicated than that, and after that point uses he, him pronouns. So I'll be using he, him pronouns throughout the duration of this review whenever I talk about Cal. And that's not a spoiler, we find that out like pretty immediately. I say it's theoretically about Cal because although the last third of the book really did focus on Cal, his process growing up, the revelation that he's intersex, and both his and his family's reactions to that fact, the first 2/3 of the book are about Cal's family before Cal is born. So it's really this generational saga about Cal's grandparents and parents. And I understand that we wanted to see where the recessive gene came from that resulted in Cal being intersex, but also it felt like we did that for way too long. I can appreciate the different stories that we had to tell in that space, like his grandparents were fleeing from, I believe, Greece. I don't remember now. I think Greece, in a time of unrest, and so they were immigrants. There was a lot of the story that dealt with that fact. His parents, I forget what was up with them. I think it was like a wartime, etc. So like big global things were happening during the generations of his grandparents and parents that ultimately pushed them together. But yeah, I felt like we spent way too long there, and I didn't understand fully the payoff of that time that we spent. Because for me, the most interesting part of the book was that last third when we really got to know Cal, his life story, and his emotions. And I didn't particularly care in the same way about the first 2/3 of the book. In the last third of the book, I especially enjoyed the conversations about a child's bodily autonomy versus parental rights with that body. That's something that we've talked about in some of my classes, especially in my developmental legal courses. We've talked about rights that parents have over a child's body versus the child's own rights over that body. And we definitely see that struggle once Cal learns that he's intersex, because doctors and his parents want to make a decision that Cal does not want to make. And so that drives a lot of the actual plot of this book when a plot is introduced. So I really appreciated those conversations because I think it's not something that we talk about very often, because obviously parents tend to want what's best for their kids. Don't fault them for that. But also children can have thoughts about their own body too, and just because they're young doesn't mean they're incorrect about those thoughts. So I liked that push and pull. It was obviously tragic to see Cal go through that, but I thought it made for a really interesting book. I also, of course, loved the discussions about gender as biology versus social construct. Like, they make a big deal about the fact that even though Cal has always been intersex, Cal was raised female. And so the doctors have lots to say about maybe how that's impacted Cal's sense of self. But also we see Cal grapple with that sense of self. And so I found those conversations really important and interesting. Cal's family was a series of interesting decisions. There were some relationships in there that I was like, oh, okay, maybe not what I would have done, but it doesn't have to be what I would have done. There was a lot happening with the family. And again, we got to spend so much time with the family, so we saw all of their reactions and feelings to all of their own decisions, which I guess is good. But again, felt like it shouldn't be the central point of this story, and yet it was given a central point for most of the book. So anyway, all that to say, it was very good. I loved some of the conversations we had. I thought Cal was a really strong main character. I liked how Cal narrated even the first 2/3 of the book. I found his perspective interesting. Like, whenever Cal had something to say about him in relation to his family's past, I felt like that was the most interesting part of the family saga bit. But it was a bit too long. And there were parts in the first 2/3 that I felt like were unnecessary. Although, what do I know? Maybe every word was necessary, but I didn't feel like they were. Nevertheless, I can understand why this won a Pulitzer Prize, and I'm glad that I finally got around to reading it, because this has been on my list for a while. So happy that this prompt came up and that I had to choose 2 books to fit it. Speaking of what 2 books I have to read, let's see what one prompt leads to 2 books next. Okay, roll 6. That's a 2. 1, 2. Another clue. So at least we'll get 6 points, but we found a weapon, so we have to read 2 books with weapons on the cover. Hooray. For the first book with a weapon on the cover, I read Here Be Dragons, which I'm giving 3.5 stars. You have to look kind of closely to see the weapon, but the guy in the armor is holding a sword. So there is a weapon on the cover. I do feel a little bad because I read this when I was slumping so hard, and that was one of the reasons I had a lot of trouble paying attention to it, especially throughout like the first half of the book, which is unfortunate because I think it was set up in a way that I would have really liked. I mean, I did like it, but I could have liked it more, I think, if I was reading it during a different time, because this one is kind of a classic quest story, but with more of a comedic take to it. The narration style is a bit more whimsical, funny, if you will. Kind of more along the lines of like, I don't know if it's more like Monty Python or Terry Pratchett, but you know, something like those vibes. Just, it pokes fun at itself and its characters, which is fun. But it's also got a really sweet message, because in this we're following Oris, and he trained at the famous school for heroes, but then when he went on his very first quest, he accidentally ended up getting the woman he saved pregnant, and so he quits being a hero and instead becomes a gardener full-time and raises his son with this girl who becomes his wife. But then one day, years and years into the future, his kid is all grown up, and he is suddenly chosen by this other guy to go on this big quest to save the last dragon so that magic can continue to exist in the world. Otherwise, like, magic will cease to exist and the world will end, yada yada. So he's chosen, but he is absolutely not a stereotypical hero in any sense of the word. So I really loved the message that, like, heroes don't look a certain way. Heroes do brave things even when they're scared and unprepared to do them. I think it just did a really sweet job of redefining what heroism is supposed to be, because there were lots of proper heroes in this book that were very much made fun of. The main one being like Conrad van Strauss, who didn't actually do anything heroic. He just used his money to get other people to do things and then took all the credit for them. Meanwhile, he was just like a snobby dude. So yeah, I liked the messaging behind it, and I enjoyed the narration style. I like a more whimsical, funny, silly time like that most of the time. But unfortunately, this time it just all felt a little flat for me. I feel like in some ways the narration style wasn't completely consistent. For example, there were some footnotes that had like funny remarks, but only like 7 in the whole book. So I feel like either commit and do that often, or don't do that at all. Like, don't just have that few of them in the book. And then also, it was sweet, but it wasn't anything absolutely mind-blowing. That's always difficult to rate, because it's like, yeah, I see what you did there, but also like, meh. I don't know how to describe it, but if you know what I'm talking about, let me know. The point is that I had a pretty good time with this. I think if I had been in a better headspace, I could have liked it even more, but I'm glad there was a sword on the cover so that I could read this. So I guess now I have to find another book with a weapon on the cover. Okay, the second book with a weapon on the cover is A King's Bargain, and I'm giving it 2.5 stars. Oops. Which, feels a little harsh. Like, I feel like I've been giving books 3 stars and maybe I feel similarly about this, but also, I don't know, this is what I'm feeling deep down in my heart. So 2.5 stars is what we're gonna go with. And as you can see, there's not just one weapon on the cover, but multiple. Both of the characters on the cover are holding swords, and one also has a bow and arrow, so there are weapons involved. I keep thinking this book is called The Legend of Tal because that's so prominent on the cover. It's the name of the series. That's always so confusing to me when the series name is like way more prominent than the book name, but it is what it is. So this is in fact called A King's Bargain. Here's the thing. It felt like there were elements of the story that I've read in other books and that were done better in other books. For example, the beginning, this like wizard comes and meets this guy and is like, we need to go on a quest. And that felt very Hobbity. Okay, I haven't actually read The Hobbit the full way through, but I've listened to the first chapter a couple of times. That felt like I've seen that before, you know? And then there was a part that also kind of felt like Robin Hobb books, but like not done like Robin Hobb in some ways. There's a blurb that says this is like a cross between Name of the Wind, Wheel of Time, and Robin Hobb. And now I haven't read 2 of those things. But like, I get it. But the thing is, sometimes a mismatch doesn't feel right. You're like, this doesn't actually feel like one cohesive original story. It feels like it's grabbing things from other places. Second big issue I had with it, the magic system and like lore of the world made absolutely no sense to me. Now that was probably a me problem. Like I was having trouble paying attention or caring when they were info dumping about those things. So they did give me information. I just did not retain it or use it in the future. So that was rough. But the thing for me is when I do read a fantasy, I want to understand what's happening. And I've just read fantasies that I feel like are good enough and work with my brain well enough that I don't have to work super hard to understand what's happening. Like it makes sense. It's a new idea, but it's still deep down makes sense. And this did not deep down make sense to me, which was hard. I also did not particularly care about our characters here, which again, I think is maybe a me problem. I've been slumping lately. Do I care about a single character that I read about in this video? I don't know. I feel like I'm saying that in a lot of these reviews that like, I didn't care about the characters, but I did not care about the characters in this. And that's hard. I'm definitely not going to continue the series. Like they set it up for a very clear series continuation. And I was like, and I will not be reading that. In this one, the basic idea is that we're following 2 individuals. Garen, he's a young man. He's a teenage boy. He's been living in his town for his whole life. And then we're following Bran, the chicken farmer, who is not who he originally says he is. And this wizard or mage, sorcerer, I forget what they're calling them in this case. But he comes to town and he's like, Bran, we gotta go. You're needed. And so Bran's like, Garen, come with me. For some reason, still unclear why he picked him. He was like, let's go. And he goes to meet the king. And the king is like, I know you've been out of the spotlight for like a while, but I'm here to make a deal with you. And he's got a specific thing that he has to see through, which again, like the details of that vague in my mind because I was just having trouble caring or paying attention. I guess in that way, what it felt like to me was the beginning of the Tawny Man trilogy in that like somebody was coming out of hiding. But yeah, I just didn't care. I think there was some interesting conversation about like the reality of a person versus a legend of a person. How sometimes legend becomes perceived reality, even if it is not factual reality. So there was something there, like that theme. That theme had me a little bit, but like other than that, meh. Just meh. So 2.5 stars it is. I got the rest of the points for this. Let's go see what the next prompt is. Roll 7. That's a 1. Okay, we're going to bounce ideas off of others. So 2 of my friends are going to get to pick my books for this. This is not ideal. Why do I do this? A friend pick, which actually means I need 2 friend picks. So that's great. And this is an action prompt, so disadvantage, can't read the room, just worth 1 point for 2 books combined, which is not great. But the first friend that I asked for this is Danielle over at Danielle Reads, and she picked one of her favorite books of all time. I've been waiting to read this book, and especially recently I've kind of been wanting to read it. So it was one of the options that I had in mind about like what I could possibly want her to choose. And she in fact did. So I read Sword of Kaigen, which I'm giving 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Like, for a fantasy rating for me, that's so, so good, because this is a high fantasy following this family. They live on this island, mountain, whatever, called the Sword of Kaigan, and they are descended from some of the most powerful families magically and like fighting wise in the area. I feel like our main character especially is the mother in this story, Misaki. I loved her so much and I loved watching her journey. There are especially some scenes around like the 60% mark where we saw a lot of character development and growth from her that I just absolutely loved. I thought the magic was really captivating and interesting. Different groups of people can use different elements, and our main characters that we're following had control of water, so that means they mainly fought with ice, and some of the things that they did with it were like, I would have never thought to do that with ice. Just absolutely genius and super cool. So I did run into a couple of problems here. One, and this is like openly acknowledged, it's written as if the series is going to continue, especially like the ending leaves a lot of things open, but the series has not yet been continued. I totally understand where the author is coming from. She first started working in this like universe and creating it when she was a very young teenager, and so she's run into some issues as an author since then, and so she was like, I think I need to put a pause on this. So totally understand why that happened, but it just left the book feeling like a little weird in the end. I also had a lot of trouble at one point in the book where for a solid 10% we were fighting, like that's all we were doing for a 10% of the book, and it's a long book. It's like 650 pages. So for 10% of that, we were just straight fighting, and I already have trouble with fighting scenes without them being that long, but it was so long. So I had trouble with that, and I really tried my best with them. I did. I was like sitting there, like moving my body in space, trying to imagine what it was like, because I don't imagine things when I read, and that's one of my issues with fight scenes. So I was really trying to like get a handle on like what was happening so that I could understand the implications of it, but I was just having a really hard time, and it lost my interest at moments there. Not a 5-star book, but still a really, really good book. I definitely want to read from this author in the future, which is good because the Shelf This Book Club for this month is by this author. So like one of the reasons Danielle picked it was because she wanted me to be able to read this before I read Blood Over Bright Haven to understand like why she chose that book for book club. So I think I totally understand now. I'm really looking forward to reading Blood Over Bright Haven. The unfortunate part, though, is that I did just read a 650-page book, no matter how good, that got me half a point, technically. So that's, you know, that's fine. But, like, it could have been better. Let's just all agree that points-wise, it could have been better. But at least I had a good time reading. For my second friend pick, I reached out to Ruby over at Ruby Read, and she recommended me a book that she has not read yet, but that has been recommended to her. And I was really excited when she picked this out because I've been meaning to read from this series for a long time because it's one of my mom's all-time favorites. And so for this one, I read Still Life by Louise Penny, and I'm giving it 3.5 stars. I did enjoy it. Like, I liked the setup to the characters, and I will be continuing in the series, maybe not chronologically, but like I'll be reading more books from this series and this author in the future. But there were some things about this particular one that didn't quite work for me. Just to get you caught up to speed, in this one, we're following some detectives as they're called to this small Quebecois town, Three Pines, and there has been a murder. This lady was out walking one morning and suddenly she was struck down, and they're trying to figure out what happened. I found our main detective very interesting. He's almost got a Sherlockian vibe, but not quite. I would say he's a very smart detective, and I especially enjoy reading from like clever detectives' perspectives. So I like that. I loved the town of Three Pines. Very cozy. It felt like I was in fall, even though it was 90 degrees outside. So just excellent fall vibes, small town vibes. Loved that. There were a couple moments in this book where the writing did not work for me because there was poetry involved in this one that I do not think will be involved in the others, just because of who some of the characters were. And poetry always throws me out of it. So that happened. And there was also this one female detective that everybody was giving a really, really, really hard time. And I didn't have an issue with her. And I didn't see why they were all being so diabolically mean to her. Like, they thought she was beyond incompetent, beyond stupid, beyond rude, and that just wasn't translating correctly to me. Like, I believe their perception, but I didn't feel it. And so that was very confusing. I'll be interested to see if she returns in the rest of the series and like what the dynamic is like, because in this first one, it was just super, super weird. Like everyone hated her and I thought they were being so dramatic about it. So yeah, thanks to Ruby for picking that. I definitely needed the fall vibes. Like I was craving them at the time that I read this. So immaculate pick for that reason, especially. And I guess now I get the other half of these points or point. Am I just getting 1 point for this? I forget already. The point is I'm not getting much, but I did read this book. So thanks for the recommendation, Ruby. Roll 8. Okay, that's another one, which I do not need in my life right now. Okay, we're going to interview a witness. We're actually going to interview 2 witnesses because of this stupid broken copiers. We're going to read 2 books with first person POV. The first witness that I'm going to interview is Captain Hook, because I read Lost Boy by Christina Henry, which is written in first person POV from the perspective of this boy, Jamie, who goes on to become Captain Hook. Instead of a retelling, this can be thought of as like a dark, inventive prequel to Peter Pan. I really enjoyed this book. I'm giving it 4 stars, but it feels slightly higher than a 4-star, but like, I don't give 4.25s or anything, so I'm giving it a 4-star for now. But know that like, I really enjoyed this book. It was darker than I expected it to be honest. This was so dark and menacing and psychologically fascinating, so I really, really enjoyed it. In this one, we're following Jamie. He's Peter's first and best friend. So back in the day, Peter Pan brought Jamie to this magical island to never grow up with him. He's the first boy that Peter ever brought, and he's the one that's been there the longest. Other things have happened to boys as they've come and gone. A lot of them have died in various ways, but Jamie has always been there. And Jamie has kind of taken on this guardianship role over the other boys. He feels some sense of responsibility towards them, especially since he's been there the longest, which stands in really stark contrast to Peter's attitude, because Peter feels no sense of responsibility for anything or anyone at any time. So this is a really dark portrait of like, what does it mean to be a child forever? Is it about innocence? Is it about a lack of responsibility? It just brings up some really interesting questions about like, what is eternal childhood like? It's so sinister. I really enjoyed that about it. I really enjoyed reading from Jamie's perspective because I found him to be a very likable character, but he was also in situations where like he had made some wrong decisions and he came to realize that over time. I thought the series of events that eventually led to him becoming Captain Hook were all very interesting because it was a gradual process. At the time that this story starts, Jamie has been on the island with Peter for a long time. He says like 150 seasons or something like that. So he's been there a while. He hasn't grown up since he got there. Well, maybe he's grown up like a little tiny bit, but not enough to say that he's grown up. He's very much still existing as like a 14-year-old boy, and Peter is like 11, something like that. But I think things really start to go downhill for Jamie with the 2 newest recruits that Peter brings to the island. One is Nip, and he's meaner than the boys that have come before. And the second is Charlie, and he's younger than any of the boys that have come before. Not only is he younger, but Jamie feels like he definitely should not have been taken from, quote, the other world, which is what they call like the real world, because Charlie actually comes from a happy family. Peter just sort of took him from that, whereas a lot of the rest of them are not coming from happy situations, and so Peter's luring them in with promises that they will be happy forever and ever. So it's a combination of this really bad guy suddenly being there, and also the most innocent and pure little 5-year-old being there, that really starts to send Jamie over the edge. And the things we find out over the course of the story are horrifying. Things about what Peter has done in the past, things that he's kept from the other boys, all of that fascinating and terrifying. Like, this portrait of him just gets worse and worse and worse. And honestly, there was a scene at the end where I was like, okay, so Peter Pan's a straight up psychopath in this. So if you're at all interested in reading what Peter Pan would be like as a absolutely like insane bad guy, I would highly recommend this book. I think it's got such interesting commentary and things to say. I think this one will be living in my brain a little bit. I might even have to reread it again in the future, and maybe my rating would go up then. Like, we'd see the impact. For now, I'm feeling 4, but it feels like a really impactful 4. I also just want to shout out the fact that I got this book on my trip to Philadelphia because 2 of my classmates picked it out for me in a used bookstore, and I finally got around to it a couple years later. So here it is. I read it, and I guess I get half a point for that, and I need to find another witness to interview. So I guess we better get going on that. The second person we're interviewing is whoever this person is. I think this is Mick. Out of the 2 characters in this book, I believe this is Mick. So I read She's Too Pretty to Burn, and I'm giving it 3 stars. This was trying to do too much. That's just the straight up of it. You'll see what I mean when I try to describe this book to you, because it's mainly classified as a thriller, but it's also trying to be a contemporary romance, but it's also just a mess in some ways. On the one hand, we're following the relationship of Mick and Veronica, who meet each other. Mick hates having her picture taken. Veronica is a photographer and lies to Mick one time and takes her photo, and then that photo goes viral. So they start a relationship. They're really bad at communicating with one another. Like, they never have a what are we discussion, and yet they both label things in their brains. So that's weird and confusing, and I don't know if the author had like originally written a scene where they define their relationship and then cut it out, but like they use words like girlfriend, but they never had that discussion. So that's a little confusing, or at least it was to me. Like, they really didn't feel like girlfriends, but they were calling each other girlfriends, whatever. And on the other hand, this is a thriller because we're following this series of art installations that are like, are they art? Are they acts of domestic terrorism? These art installations, anyway, that are headed up by Veronica's best friend, Nico, who's an interesting character. There were just so many decisions made in this book that didn't make any sense to me. Like, I would say I didn't really know the characters by the end of this book because they made so many decisions that were all over the place. I didn't feel like I actually understood their motivations as we went through it. Like, they were just kind of doing things and then doing crazier things, which I guess makes sense for teenagers, but like, it was still just really hard to wrap my head around. I think an interesting discussion that this offered was that of morality, because every single character in this book does something bad at some point in time. You're not going to have a really true prototypical hero in this story. And I find that to be challenging in a good way to me. Like, people are not inherently all good or all bad. And so all the people in this do bad things at some point and good things at other points. And I think that's good to challenge people with, especially because this is a young adult book. So like, teenagers will be reading this and grappling with that idea, which I think is healthy to grapple with. So I did like that about it. I also liked that for a YA book, we got representations of different types of parental relationships. Like, one of our main characters really, really got along with her mom. One really didn't. I feel like in YA, we either see like one or the other, but we got both from our 2 prominent perspectives. This whole thing is told from first person point of view. It's also told in dual perspective. So there's that. Again, I just go back to the fact that these characters were confusing. The relationship between our 2 main characters was confusing. That was almost built as if it was all about the chemistry, and yet I felt like they had absolutely none. And I don't know why you would want to be in a relationship with a person who starts off your relationship by lying to you and doing something that makes you uncomfortable. Like, that just didn't make any sense to me. And throughout this book, these main characters continue to disrespect one another's boundaries, especially I feel like Veronica just walks all over Mick's boundaries. So that was super weird because like, I'm not rooting for them. And you want to be rooting for your characters, but I was not rooting for them. And the way the ending was written, it seemed like you should have been rooting for the 2 of them, but I was not. Also, this should have ended 30 pages before it did. The ending was weird and uncalled for. It was just trying to do too much. But there were some interesting things happening, so like, it kept my attention. So 3 stars it is. She's Too Pretty to Burn. That's our second witness. I don't even know what roll we're on at this point. I just know we're doubling everything. Okay, so that's a 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bonus! Okay, we're going to get some awesome gear and read 2 books that are my favorite color. My favorite color is green, if anybody's wondering. Green. So let's go read 2 green books. For the first book of my favorite color, I read Key Lime Pie Murder by Joanne Fluke, because that sure is green, and green is my favorite color. And I'm giving this book 3.5 stars. It's another installment. I don't remember which number in the series. We're a ways in now, but it's a ways in to the Hannah Swensen cozy mystery series, very popular cozy mystery series from the 2000s, 2010s. I read many of them growing up, listened to the audiobooks with my mom, etc. So these are very nostalgic for me. This one had a really fun setting. I like how Joanne Fluke is changing the situation a little every time to keep it interesting. So in this one, the Tri-County Fair is happening, and our main character, Hannah Swensen, is going to be a judge for a lot of the baked goods competitions. And so we've got this really fun fair setting, and we get to see all of our favorite small town people, but in this new context. And we also get some new characters rolling into town because the fair is like visiting. It's a group that brings fairs like lots of places. So we've got some traveling people that come in and add to the story. Other than that, it's a pretty basic Hannah Swensen story. Someone dies. Hannah tries to figure out who the murderer is, even though she has no business doing that. She ends up in trouble, but she gets saved in the end, and justice is served. I just thought about the idea of justice being served by a baker, by a person who serves food. That is silly. But yeah, I enjoyed this one. There are definitely some hallmarks of the time that this was written. I would say definitely content warning for fat phobia throughout the series. Just the way that female characters talk about their bodies and other people's bodies is like ick. I do find our main cast of characters interesting. I personally like Hannah Swensen. I like the love triangle situation. And so I have a fun time with them, even though they themselves are nothing special. I think my nostalgia definitely adds a layer to that. Like, these are characters that I grew up with. I'm always happy to spend my time reading one of these books. And this one was my favorite color, so that's great. For the second book of my favorite color, so the second green book, matches my sweater, I read Heart Song by TJ Klune, which I'm giving 3.5 stars. Look at it. She's so green. This is the third book in the Green Creek series, which is a series about werewolves. Okay, and they're all queer, basically. TJ Klune has described the main pack in this series as a walking pride parade, and I love that. Love it so much. This one I felt weird about for a couple of reasons. First, in the beginning, I was so confused, which was a combination of two things. One, I had forgotten who everyone was. Okay, sorry to say it. I was like, who is this? Especially because in this one, we're following Robbie, and he is in the rest of the series, but he did not take up any of my brain space in the first 2 books of the series. Let me just make that very clear. So the book opened, and we were following Robbie, and I was like, who's this again? But the second reason is because TJ Klune made a choice. So that was also partially just how this was written. Because we're following Robbie, right? Who we know is a member of the Bennett Pack. Again, he was in the first 2 books in the series. Was he in the first book? He was at least in the second book, okay? He's an established character in the series. Whether or not I remembered anything about him, he was. But here, at the start of the story, he's extremely lonely. He's living with the pack run by the Alpha of All. So he lives in this like weird, I don't know, commune, basically. And we have no idea where in time and space we are in relation to the rest of the series for like a while, okay? And that's confusing. And it's also confusing because there are elements of memory manipulation in this book, and we're reading from a character whose memory is not fully intact, which just makes it extra confusing because the person who's supposed to help establish us in the world doesn't know what's going on at all. And also, no one's telling him for a good third of the book. So I was going along not knowing what was happening, and that made it really hard to get into this book. I do think there were some cool things that TJ Klune got to do because of the memory manipulation in this book. Like, we got to have lots of discussions about the importance of having memories in understanding and feeling your connections to others. So that was cool. And also answering the age-old question, if love is fated, do you have to remember falling in love with them the first time in order to feel it this time? Because it's very much a second chance romance in some ways. Yeah, that's how I describe it. I loved that our love interest in this book is asexual, especially because one of the things that has felt difficult for me in reading this series, even though like loved the first book, gave it 5 stars, enjoyed the second book fine, But one of the problems for me was like there were a lot of things described that I just really couldn't relate to as an ace person, and it felt like nobody like me could ever exist in the main family that we're following, which is sad because like that's not the only thing about all of them, but it made it feel like, I don't think I'm describing this right. I think what I'm trying to say is like the dynamics in this series as a whole have a distinctly un-ace flair to them. And I feel like in this book, TJ Klune created a really beautiful place for the ace community within this series, which I feel like was just very nice and validating. So I loved him for that. I also really appreciated that we had the representation of an ace character who's not aromantic, because a lot of times in literature we read ace characters who are aro ace, and personally I haven't found a lot of literature representation for the ace community for people who are not both aro and ace and are just ace. So enjoyed that. It's really hard to describe the plot of this one. It's not really about the plot, to be honest. Like memory loss, okay, we try to get it back, etc. That's the gist. Here's another of the issues that I had though. Because of the memory loss, for a lot of the book, we had the opportunity to build a new connection where old ones existed. Instead, we relied a lot on telling us that those connections existed. So we were being told there were connections instead of really seeing or feeling them. And at first, our main character, Robbie, was also like, you can't just tell me this and expect me to feel this way. Like, I don't remember this. But eventually, it felt like without good reason, he just went along with it and was like, yeah, I get it now. And I really don't think he should have reached that point with the things that happened in the book. So that was a huge complaint for me. I just really feel like we didn't get the second chance that our characters deserved because we relied a lot on just being told, hey, you fell in love in the past. And they're like, guess we're in love now. And like some trust had to be built, but again, not nearly as much as I would have liked or expected. And then as always, even though I never remember what happens at the end of these books after I read them, like even right now, reviewing this book could not tell you what happened at the ending, but I did write in my notes that it stressed me out about the rest of the series. And I feel like TJ Klune does that really well in this series. We're going along for 500 pages. All of a sudden at the end, we're really stressed about what's going to happen next. And by the time I get around to reading the next book, I've forgotten all about that stress. Hooray. All in all, a 3.5 star. I had a good time with it. There were things I really loved about this, things that are like meh about. So it is what it is. But there's my second point for reading a favorite color book. Done with the green books. On to the next roll. Next roll. Maybe the last roll. Come on. No. They did not solve the case this time. But now that we've read some green books, let's get a green card. We're going to access some phone records and read 2 sci-fi books. The first book that I read for this was Spectrum Worlds, which I'm giving 3 stars. It's a sci-fi book that follows an android called Postman, or the Postman, whichever you prefer, and he is a postman. He delivers things. And at the beginning of our story, he is on his way to make his final delivery before he retires. But the thing is, that does not go exactly according to plan, because people know of the postman's reputation for getting things delivered no matter what it takes. Like, your thing will get delivered confidentially, safely, no matter what he has to do to make that happen. And some bad people want to put that trait to use. And so he's kind of blackmailed into continuing his job, but for some new people. And he's actually asked to deliver this human, which, like, he lives in a part of town where real humans are not supposed to be typically found, etc. So a fairly interesting premise, but it got messy at some points. First of all, our main character had this weird ability sometimes to see different spectrum worlds, so to see different possible outcomes. At this point in the series, we don't really know why, and yet, like, for an android to have abilities like this, it feels like it should be a technologically explained ability, not this weird, mysterious, magical feeling ability. So that just felt weird and really took me out of it at times. It just seemed really like a convenience so that he could get out of tough situations because he could figure out what to expect and could figure out which actions he took would result in his desired outcome. So that was strange. And then also, like, plot wise, it got muddled and like skippy around the middle section. There's this section where they're traveling outside of the city, and that part got like weird, and it just didn't flow right in my brain. So I had trouble with that. Add on to that the fact that I really did not care about these characters. I really think this book, like, the premise was what was pushing me through. I found it just fascinating that we were following this android with this very specific job and this very specific reputation. I was like interested to see where that was going, but overall it didn't blow me away. So I'm giving it 3 stars, which, like, is that generous? Is it not? I don't know. Nowadays, I don't even know what my own ratings mean, so I'm so sorry. I know that's not helpful for you. It did ask some pretty interesting questions about, like, ethically, how do we live alongside technology? It asked questions about, like, personhood and individuality, especially once they introduced the idea of, I forget what they called them, but basically there are like people that each android is modeled off of. They're kind of like, they're counterpoints in a way, but not like huge sections of people, just one android to one person type ratio, which was weird. And so, like, it asked a lot of questions about personality being built in versus an actual personality, which was pretty interesting. But again, just like didn't particularly care for the characters. Some parts felt skippy. In fact, one section when they went out of the city kind of felt like it didn't happen at all. Like, they went out of the city, stuff happened, they came back into the city, and I was like, was that real? Did that just happen? Like, it just felt completely disjointed. So anyway, I'm settling on 3 stars. Luckily, our clues are worth double points with Frank because we have another book to read for this. So let's go find another sci-fi. For my second sci-fi, I went for like a little bit of a different vibe. So the first sci-fi was like android, post-human technology, that kind of vibe. And for the second sci-fi, I chose a first contact story. So I read Axiom's End, which I'm also giving 3 stars. 3 stars to all the sci-fi. Yippee! This is a pretty, like, classic, normal take on a first contact story. I guess the interesting part is where our main character is situated in comparison to, like, government conspiracies, because our main character is estranged from her father, but her father leaked this one memo and has accused the United States government of knowing about an alien species and not being honest with the public about it. And so there's like this whole conspiracy element behind it. And she and her family have nothing to do with him until one day she's kind of forced into the situation because she's at home and all of a sudden there is another being in her home. And she's like, what the heck is this? And so she gets drawn in by the government and by the alien species as the person who has initiated the real first contact, because it turns out, we find out this pretty early on, but the government has had contact with the alien species, but the aliens refused to actually communicate with the humans. And so there's been no successful contact as far as communication goes. The main alien that we're concerned with in this book implants something in our main character's mind so that they can communicate with one another. And so throughout this story, she's experiencing this first contact and understanding this species really for the first time. And she's also serving as their translator to the US government. I had a really hard time with how much action was in this book, especially just unfortunately because of the situations in which I ended up reading most of this book. Like, I was on the bus one day reading most of this and a lot of action was happening and I was very, very sleepy that day. And I already have trouble paying attention to action sequences and then you make me sleepy and it's like game over. So that was rough. But I did find the descriptions of the aliens and their culture really interesting because I think the author tried to go outside of a prototypical alien idea and really tried to emphasize the idea that when we meet a new intelligent species, there's going to be a failure in understanding somewhere because we can only try to conceptualize them with our existing knowledge, but they don't fit within our existing knowledge. And vice versa, we will also not make sense to them because they have these existing schematics that we don't fall into. And so there was this idea that even if you communicate with one another, there will always be a breakdown or failure in communication between the species. I found that to be like a really good point and an interesting conversation. And seeing how our main character grappled with that, especially emotionally, she built this connection with the alien because she was spending so much time with them, him. There was another discussion about like, is gender a thing that we're imposing on this alien species, etc. So like lots of interesting questions about culture and how it's translated. And there's also this sense that like their society was so different than ours that if the aliens stayed, they would feel no choice but to destroy humanity as it currently sits. Just going into this idea with them thinking like peaceful coexistence is impossible made for a really interesting framework to work within. I just really lost myself at points in all of the action that was happening. I wish we could have spent some more time having those deep conversations and really thinking about those philosophical questions instead of just a lot of fighting. And I understand why that was the choice that was made. But like personally for me in sci-fi, taking time to really sit in those questions is what makes a sci-fi really great to me. And this just didn't give me the space to do that, which is why it's a 3-star, which is still good. Like I had fun. I thought there were interesting ideas, but it's not like a new fave or anything. So yeah, 3 stars it is. And that's our second and final sci-fi book down. Back to the board. Please let this be the last roll. I'm begging you. 4, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Case closed. That was an additional 7 books to the game. They need to fix this copier. We finally made it. We're at the end of the board. 16 books later. And I'm in physical pain because I just added up my cool points. It took a little mathing because with Frank as my partner, action points were only worth 1 point each. Clues were worth double the points. But then whenever I read 2 books, most of the time in this episode, it was just the 1 set of points. Anyway, I added them all up. And out of this whole year of TBR Crime, this is the episode with the most books that I had to read. It is also the episode with the second lowest number of total cool points. Because in this whole episode, I've earned 30 cool points. That's it. But we made it. The board is behind us. The case is closed. That being said, I'm going to wrap this episode up here. If you liked it, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up. And please comment down below, what did you think of everything that happened during this round? And subscribe for more bookish and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye.